Are you ready to launch your career to new heights? Visit careers.dish.com/technician now and uncover a world of exciting opportunities waiting just for you. From cutting-edge technology to a supportive work environment, Dish has everything you need to thrive. Don't wait any longer to kickstart your next opportunity. Apply today and join the Dish family where innovation meets opportunity. Visit us online at careers.dish.com/technician. Your future starts now.
At the UPS Store, we know things can get busy this upcoming holiday. You can count on us to be open and ready to help with any packing and shipping or anything else you might need.
Is there anything you can't do?
Actually, I don't have a good singing voice. The UPS... Nope. But our certified packing experts can pack and ship just about anything.
At least that's good.
The UPS Store. Be unstoppable. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. Come in today to get your holiday goodies there on time.
Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and this episode is coming to you 1 week after my previous episode. This is a little bonus episode during the holiday season. I was fortunate enough to sit down with a crime scholar and enthusiast who had a book come out this year that I think many of you are going to like. Perhaps it might even be a good holiday gift for a fellow crime lover in your life or for yourself. It just felt like a good time to do a little extra episode here during the end of year holiday season. So that is coming your way in just a moment, but I will be coming back to you in 1 week's time with a holiday themed episode. So stay tuned for that. And of course, my pledge drive for ratings and reviews is ongoing for the podcast. I have received a handful more of ratings since my previous episode last week, but I still have many, many more to go if I am going to reach my goal of 1,000 ratings on Apple Podcasts. I'm not even yet up to 900, actually. So now this is the point of the pledge drive where I, as the moderator or announcer, am like, we only have a couple of minutes left and we have so many more pledges to go. We have so much left to do. So please, if you haven't yet reviewed the podcast, just take a moment right now. Just pause the episode. The interview hasn't even begun yet. Just pause it and click right on those little stars wherever you're listening to this podcast. It will make me so very happy. And I so appreciate those of you who have already done it. This podcast has reached so many people, but I want it to reach so many more people. And you can help with that simply by rating the podcast. It is a straightforward, time-efficient, tangible way that you can help the All About Agatha podcast reach more people and help to grow the Agatha Christie loving community. Thank you very much for hearing me out on that, listeners. And now I'm going to turn to the interview for this episode. Let's get started. My guest, Kate Jackson, lives in the northeast of England and reviews crime fiction, mostly classic crime fiction, on her blog, www.crossexaminingcrime.com. She also hosts the photo sharing meme #MurderEveryMonday on Twitter and Instagram, which I'm going to guess many of you are familiar with. It certainly pops up on my feed on a regular basis. Kate has spoken at the Bodies from the Library conference and also at the International Agatha Christie Festival. She was just there this past September. And she is also a regular contributor to Crime and Detective Stories magazine. She is the author of a number of works about detective fiction, including The Pocket Detective, The Pocket Detective 2, and a chapter within Eric Sandberg's 100 Greatest Literary Detectives, in which she wrote about Juanita Sheridan's Lily Wu series, which was first published in the 1940s and 50s and is set mainly in Hawaii. That is a series I am not familiar with, but I would imagine at least a few of you out there are. I'm going to have to check that out. Kate's latest offering is what we will be discussing today. It came out in June of 2023, and it is titled How to Survive a Classic Crime Novel. What a wonderful title. Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Oh, thank you for having me, Kemper.
So before we get into your book, I know that you are a huge fan of Christie. So I'm wondering if you could just tell us how you first came to discover her, or as I've come to phrase it, what is your Christie origin story?
Well, I think, unlike a lot of people, I think my origin story doesn't really start as a child, as much more at university. Because when I was a child growing up, I was actually much more interested in non-fiction. And I knew my sister got the Agatha Christie magazine in the early 2000s. So she got a book and a magazine each month. And she'd always watch the David Suchet adaptations. And I'd kind of flit in and out of them. It wasn't until the third year of my English literature degree that I was kind of thinking, I need to write a dissertation. I enjoyed writing about Sherlock Holmes last year. What could I do this year? And in the end, I decided to write about female detectives. And in particular, I looked at Miss Marple, obviously, and then Mrs. Bradley, who's created by Gladys Mitchell, and also Josephine Tay's Miss Pym. And it was great. It did mean I got to watch the Joan Hickson adaptations and count it as genuine research.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I think that is pretty unusual. I love that you came to her within a university setting. What is this that you just mentioned that your sister had was it a subscription to a magazine where you would get a novel of Agatha Christie's every month or something like that?
Yes, I don't know whether it might have been something that the Christie estate endorsed, I think. But you got one, it kind of went chronologically, I think. You get each book and then you get a magazine about that book, looking at Christie's life at that particular time, looking at the social and cultural kind of context, and also obviously looking at bits of like the plot as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Are they still doing that, or is that something that was available, you said, around the early 2000s?
No, it's definitely out of print now. But okay. I think if you've got a big wallet, I think you can probably get some on eBay.
Future collecting. I have lots of future plans when it comes to collecting Christie, and almost all of them are out of my budget, but that's really, really cool. Well, many of us Christie obsessives have a hard time choosing just one favorite Christie, but I'm curious if you have a favorite title and whether your answer would change if you're considering the question less from a personal perspective and more as one who writes professionally about classic detective fiction, or maybe not, since it sounds like you did really first come to Christie in a sort of quasi-professional or at least academic way.
Yeah, I don't think I could really split the personal from the professional. I think with either hat on, I will struggle to come up with a favourite Christie, to be honest. Because I think in some ways, my love of Miss Marple is always going to help sway the ratings a little. Something like Nemesis, it's really character rich, but it is a bit structurally weak at the same time. So that might sort of boost the rating a little bit. But I think at the same time, I'm not blind to its difficulties. So I don't think I could then say, oh, it's Christie's best book, as I think I'll be struggling to, support that idea.
I love that you're mentioning Nemesis. I don't know if you know this, but I'm in an ongoing feud with John Curran about Nemesis because he thinks that Nemesis is ranked much too high in the podcast's rankings. And for all of the reasons that you just enumerated, I am a huge fan of Nemesis, even though it is imperfect. And perhaps because it is imperfect, because I think those are the Christies that are the most fascinating, because we can pick them apart and critique them and talk about the ways in which they work and the ways in which they don't. And that, I think, it's not unique to Christie. It's not like she's the only writer who comes up with flawed creations. We're all flawed humans, so anything we create is flawed. But there's something, I think, particular to some of the Christie books that just lends them to interesting discussion and disagreement. And Nemesis might be the best example of that, as evidenced by the fact that it is the focal point of my ongoing feud with John Curran. So I think that's a great title to highlight within the oeuvre.
Yeah, and I think when I come to reviewing or come back to rereading Christie, I think things like themes, characterization, and intertextuality are kind of the things that I'm, in a sense, almost looking for, but without an agenda. I don't try and go, I'm going to look for X in this book or look for Y. Mm-hmm. I tend to look out to see what jumps out at me. It's a bit like Miss Marple having one of her village parallel moments. I'll just be reading part of the Christie novel and going, oh, that actually reminds me of so-and-so, which I quite like.
Right, right. Well, you mentioned, I'm curious if there are other classic authors besides Christie who you admire. I know that there are because you're a scholar of the genre overall, not just of Christie. And you already mentioned Gladys Mitchell and Josephine Tey. You specifically mentioned Miss Pym of Miss Pym Disposes. And I'm pretty sure that I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but Miss Pym Disposes is one of my very favorite classic crime. I don't even know if I would call it a classic crime fiction novel because it's so unusual, but I absolutely adore it. I just say it's one of my favorite books, I guess, one of my favorite pieces of literature. But do you admire Gladys Mitchell and Josephine Tey, or do you have other favorite authors who you've studied at this point?
I will have to admit that I'm not a Gladys Mitchell or a Miss Pym fan. Oh my, Miss Pym drives me up the wall with her irresponsible attitude to sleuthing. It's just like, oh, I've just ruined an innocent person's life. I've let the killer go off scot-free. Oh, well, I'm just going to go back off to London, have a nice time.
Oh, she's the worst. Like, yeah, she's the absolute worst, but brought to such life, right? Like, I feel like I know several Miss Pyms in my own life. I mean, it's not as heightened. The circumstances around what they do and their irresponsibility isn't as heightened as that, but she feels so real to me, you know?
I think from probably a writing point of view, I think, Tey is good. I think it's just because Miss Pym's behaviour so crosses a line for me in terms of, kind of morals and ethics that I think my annoyance with her probably prevents me from liking the other parts of the book. And then with Mrs. Bradley, I love the character, but I think it's just Gladys Mitchell's got quite a unique approach to plotting and pacing and coherence. That sometimes it is a little bit challenging reading her books. But I think I've probably got 3 different camps of writers that I do admire. Mm-hmm. And I think the first camp would be comic crime. So someone like Leo Bruce, who wrote the Sergeant Beef and Lionel Townsend series, which is a brilliant kind of riff on the Sherlock and Watson format, because Lionel Townsend is this really snobbish, middle-class sort of journalist. He's hoping to chronicle a great detective's cases, and he ends up with the beer-swilling and the dart-playing Sergeant Beef. And, of course, being snobbish, he's totally embarrassed by him, and he's always thinking he's going to have to explain his behaviour to the posh clients and suspects. But unsurprisingly, it's obviously Lionel who ends up kind of being tripped up and being made to look foolish and stupid instead, which I think is a lot of fun. And there's also Delano Ames. I love his Jane and Dagbert Brown series. They're quite a fun sort of sleuthing duo, though I think their relationship is a bit more mature and it's a little bit not quite Tommy and Tuppence. And I like how they will have little sort of snappy or bitey remarks at each other. Because in Death of a Fellow Traveller, Dagbert has gone off to do some, have a cream tea with a very luscious blonde, all part of the case, having to interview her. And Jane's a little bit peed off with him. So when it comes to the idea of, should we do a reconstruction of the crime being someone falling off a cliff, Jane does happily volunteer to be the one who does the pushing. And I think female writers is another, obviously, interest that I've continued since university. But I think it's sort of more mid-century, sort of often suspense female writers that I'm drawn to, such as Charlotte Armstrong and Jean Potts, who I think we wouldn't have the suspense fiction we have today if we didn't have writers like those two, who really did a lot of original thinking when it came to plotting. And something like Jean Potts's The Little Lie, it all starts with a woman who's had a spat with her fiancé and he decides to leave her, start a new job in a new state. But she doesn't want to lose face. So she tells one little lie about, what's happened. But unfortunately, it all snowballs and the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it all comes to this sort of very dramatic finale. And to be honest, I'm surprised, given how much we like sort of domestic suspense in our TV and films, why this one hasn't been adapted yet.
I've never heard of it.
Oh, I definitely recommend it, along with Charlotte Armstrong's The Unsuspected as well.
Are those published under the British Library sort of reprints? I know that they have taken a lot of books that were previously difficult to find or maybe even out of print and made them available again.
Well, they're both American authors. So the American Mystery Classic series has reprinted The Unsuspected along with The Chocolate Cobweb by Charlotte Armstrong. And then the Stark House Press have reprinted a number of Jean Potts titles, including The Little Lie.
There you go. You schooled me. I'm not even aware of these American writers. So they were both writing in the middle of the 20th century, like 40s, 50s-ish?
Yeah, and even into the 60s and a little bit into the 70s, I think. But
Gotcha.
Yeah, I just really love how you didn't have to lose the kind of the plot. It wasn't like we've had to focus everything on characters and atmosphere and sort of throw plot out the window. The plotting is very much at the heart of it and is driven by the characters.
They both sound really interesting. I've got some homework to do. Was there another category? I thought you said there were three.
Okay. Yes, there was. Silly me. Typical thing, mentioned 3 categories and I forget my last one. Now, the third one is experimental writers. So this doesn't mean these writers of all their books are brilliant. That's the nature of experiments. You're trying something different to see what works and what doesn't. So there's people like Anthony Berkeley and Richard Hull who very much take different concepts and see if I do this instead, or if I push this rule this far, what happens. So, for example, Richard Hull wrote a book called Last First, where he has the final chapter is the first chapter, which is quite interesting. And then in Excellent Intentions, the book is structured around a trial, but you don't know who is in the box, as it were, for the crime until the very end.
Oh, that's interesting. There was just so much written during that period. Like there was such feverish invention happening in the mid-century crime novel. I know the Golden Age, it kind of varies what period we're talking about when we talk about the Golden Age. And usually I think people expand it a little bit beyond just the interwar period so we can get into the 40s and the 50s. But I feel like I'm constantly learning about new titles. I mean, you just reeled off several of them that I've never heard of. And that's part of the joy of it because it feels limitless. It feels like there's always another title and always some other spin or innovation that people have put on it. And that's within the classic genre. I mean, let alone what people are doing nowadays with contemporary mystery. So thank you for that, just little glimpse, I think, of, some of the more hidden gems that some people might not be aware of. I certainly wasn't.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I think even from when I sort of got into crime fiction, maybe because I was that little bit older, I didn't just stick with the 1 or 2 main writers. That's not a bad thing. If the only crime fiction you read is Christie, then I think, that's not a bad place to be. But sure. I think for me, it was always, I wanted to try this other writer. So I think from very early on, I had a sense that there was more than one way writers were writing in the 20s, the 30s and the 40s. And I think it's left me, very cautious about making any generalizations about that period because it was so creative and there's so much variety going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's true. A lot of people, when you find a writer in your childhood and then you might stick with it. And with Christie too, of course, there's the issue of accessibility because she's so accessible and so many of these other authors are less accessible, although that's changing. I mean, it's changing because of the British Library and other reprints that are happening and ebooks as well. I mean, I feel like it is sometimes a little easier and cheaper for mystery fans to access some of these titles that may have fallen out of print and now are back in print or just may not be on every bookshelf in every bookstore the way that Christie is or in every library. So sometimes you have to do a little bit more work, but it usually you reap some significant rewards, I think, even though agreed, I would never criticize anyone who loves Christie and sticks with Christie because I'm pretty much guilty as charged on that front. She'll always be, I think, the mystery reader who I read the most and think about the most because my love of Christie has something to do with Christie specifically, even though it is also a love of mystery. And I think that's a lot of what Catherine and I have been interrogating on this podcast now for 7 years. So to that end, I'd love to talk about your new book, How to Survive a Classic Crime Novel, because as the title would indicate, I mean, this is coming from someone who is widely read in classic crime and has a lot to say about it. What is the book about, and how did you come to write it?
Well, it's very much a spoof, tongue-in-cheek guide to how to survive if you woke up one morning and found yourself in a classic crime novel. It's not academic, you don't need to have any prior reading. And it sort of starts in chapter 1 with you waking up and needing to know how to avoid, dying in chapter 1 in the house. And then the other chapters expand onto, commuting to work, staying safe in different types of employment. And then it expands out into, staying safe at parties, on holidays, in relationships, and of course, needing to know what to do if you come across a body. And obviously, all of this advice comes from, classic crime books that I've read or that I've been able to access information on via, various, blogs around the world, really. I would say in terms of how it came about, it's a very dull answer because it was more a case of I was working on a different project with the British Library, but we had to shelve that. And they were like, ooh, can we have a meeting in 2 weeks to discuss whatever new ideas you have? And I was like, of course, naturally. And then thinking, oh dear, I need an idea. And it just, in a sense, it really did just fall into my head. And then I went to the meeting with that, just literally with the title, actually. And we fleshed it out from there. And I had 3 weeks of very intense research to come up with a proposal for it. And it kind of just took off from there, really.
Well, yeah, I love that you're basically applying the self-help model to the classic crime genre, which is, it's a genre that I think everyone at least has some familiarity with. And it's funny to mash the two together. I mean, even just the title is immediately amusing and you kind of know exactly what it is. I'm not surprised that you were able to more or less sell the project to them off of the title. So I'm wondering if you can take us a little bit through the book just to give listeners a sense of what it's like. I mean, I will just put this out there. We are in the midst of the holiday season, and I think this could be a great little stocking stuffer gift for the mystery lover in your life, because it really is quite amusing, and it's additive, I think, to someone who has already expressed a love for mysteries. Because one of the best things that I got out of it is that you give such clear citations to the books that you're referencing, both in the text itself and in detailed endnotes. So I felt like as I was reading it that I was learning about new crime novels that I hadn't yet read in a very fun but non-spoilery way as you were taking me on this journey through the world of classic crime fiction.
Well, that was definitely something I wanted to do because I, in a sense, can see how varied crime fiction was then. I wanted to express that in the book, to try and get beyond just the big names. And apart from that, I think Agatha Christie is referenced slightly more limited in the book. That was primarily if I didn't want to spoil them. Yeah. That's probably quite a cardinal sin, I think, is to spoil a Christie in a book. So I was like, no, definitely don't do that, Kate. But so I think in terms of the content of the book, it isn't just a long list of do's and don'ts. It's not like 1,000 things not to do in a library. But I've been quite sort of playful with the types of texts inside the chapters. So there's quizzes, and there's, such as a one about, what relationship pitfall are you most likely to encounter? And, things about, I think there's even a holiday gift guide for Christmas. Again, the gifts are based on different books that I've read. And there's like sort of top tips on getting a job. There's the pros and cons of different ways of disposing of a body. Should that ever happen to you? I think the best one was a one from an Arthur Upfield book, The Sands of Windy, because he got the idea off one of his work colleagues, because he was a fence boundary rider at that time in Australia. And he's quite a fledgling author. He wanted a perfect-ish way of disposing of a body for his next book. And he discussed the problem. One of his colleagues came up with the idea of burning the corpse with a kangaroo Then you sift the ashes and you then dissolve any metal in acid. And then you grind any bones into dust, and then you let the wind take the dust away. And it sounds completely ridiculous, completely outlandish. But another colleague of these two people was listening in, and he actually killed and disposed of 3 people that way. Yet when it came to trial, they could only try him for one of those deaths because there was no evidence and no trace left of the first 2 victims. And Upfield did have to go to court to testify and prove that, the person in the stand could have heard them discussing that plot mechanic.
Wow, that is chilling, and I suppose a macabre endorsement for that book. So I know, Kate, that even though the book is much more than Agatha Christie, which I think will be of interest to Christie fans, since again, mystery lovers are often looking for authors outside of Christie, especially once we've read all 66 of those books. It's always a sad moment in every Christie lover's life when they realize, oh no, we don't have any more Christies to read. I know that you did prepare a sort of miniature version of the journey that you take the reader on in your book that is Christie specific for purposes of our conversation today, How to Survive an Agatha Christie novel. So I would love if you could take us down that rather dangerous garden path and give us all some advice on how to survive an Agatha Christie.
So, Kemper, you think you have what it takes to survive an Agatha Christie novel. You've ranked all her mysteries and produced hours of entertaining podcast episodes on the subject. But is that going to be enough? Let us hope so as you navigate your way through this talk. At points, you'll be asked questions which ask how you wish to interact with an object or which location you want to go to next. Some of these questions have immediate effects, whilst others will have delayed consequences. But will they come back to haunt you? These decisions will cumulatively affect your ending. Will you make the right decisions and reach a happy conclusion? Or will your journey be pitted with mistakes and end in murder? Who knows if it'll be yours or someone else's? It could be either. We're going to start our quest in the kitchen, as this is the safest room I would argue to be in if you find yourself in an Agatha Christie novel. After all, there's only one attempt to drown someone in the washing up. You're highly unlikely to die in this room, but that does not mean it is unimportant, as it's often the place where would-be murderers prepare or dispatch their poisons. So it's a good room to keep under close observation. The biggest danger to watch out for is ingredient or meal tampering. The fear of having your food poisoned by your nearest and dearest had been a concern long before Christie first put pen to paper. In 1855, for instance, the weekly newspaper The Leader published a piece called The Poisoner in the House, and it asked its readers these chilling questions. If you feel a deadly sensation within and grow gradually weaker, how do you know that you are not poisoned? If your hands tingle, do you not fancy that it is arsenic? How can you be sure that it is not? Your household is perhaps a well-regulated family. Your friends and relations all smile kindly upon you. The meal at each period of the day is punctual and looks correct. But how can you possibly tell that there is not arsenic in the curry? The only way you can eat your food with confidence and know that it is poison-free is to work alone in the kitchen and not let others distract you from your preparations. This is a bit of a bummer for those of us who don't enjoy cooking, and unfortunately the modern-day ready meal did not come into being until the 1950s in America and was not common in the UK until the 1960s and 70s, when domestic freezers were in greater use. A second best option might be supervising the person who does the cooking, although this might make you unpopular. Poison can crop up everywhere, including tea, coffee, pink gin, champagne, cocktails, oysters, sandwiches, and marmalade. One final tip is to invest in plastic cutlery, as sharp implements such as knives have the unpleasant habit of ending up stuck inside human bodies in Christie's universe. Agnes Woodall from The Moving Finger would also like to add a suggestion of banning skewers, so they can quite literally be a pain in the neck. It's time for your first decision, Kemper. After working hard in the kitchen, do you want to relax in the bath or in your bedroom?
Oh, well, I think I'm going to have to relax in the bath and take a page out of the book of Agatha Christie herself. We know she loved her baths. So let's go to the bathroom.
Yeah, good choice. And before you go into the bathroom, do you pick up today's crossword and pen?
Of course I do.
To increase your chances of a relaxing time, here are some handy tips for staying safe in a Christie Universe bathroom. Keep your toiletries under lock and key to prevent anyone adding a toxic substance to them or swapping them with a poison. This includes items such as nasal spray and eye drops. Not every bathroom homicide looks like a murder, though. It's to the killer's advantage to make their crime look like a death from natural causes, as unsurprisingly, this curtails any police investigation. This option is more likely to be used with a victim who has pre-existing health conditions, or who gives the appearance of such. The murderer may only have to set off rumours to that effect. In the case of Major Palgrave's demise in the Caribbean Mystery, the killer plants blood pressure medication in his bathroom and the idea that he had high blood pressure into the minds of the other guests. As Christie wrote in one of her short stories, there is nothing so intangible, so difficult to pin down as the source of a rumour. One solution to this situation is having a medicine inventory securely kept, as it will make it harder for criminals to give a false impression of your medical history. If you do take any medicine and keep them in the bathroom, make sure no one has switched the contents for something containing a toxin. Mrs. Benson in Cards on the Table might have lived if she'd checked her syrup of figs bottle more closely, as she would have realised her bottle now had hat paint inside it. My final piece of bathroom safety advice comes from Miss Marple, who in strange jest mentions the dangers of over-polishing your linoleum flooring, as it makes it easier to slip and break a leg. Even worse, if the bathroom door is locked, you might have the grave social embarrassment of having the gardener effecting a rescue through the window. You decide to spruce yourself up and begin applying your shaving cream. Preoccupied, you cut yourself. You try to carry on, but soon you begin to feel peculiar and start to see disturbing figures coming towards you. You lash out before everything goes black. I probably should have mentioned that in Christie's universe, not every toiletry is tampered with for killing purposes. Like in one of Prow's Labours of Hercules short stories, your shaving cream has been doctored with atropine sulfate. This is what gave you the hallucinations and caused you to act in a violent and confused manner. Atropine in the guise of belladonna is again used for similar reasons in one of Miss Marple's cases. The poisonous intent is used to make their target look like they're of unsound mind, which can be exploited in more than one way. But what about you? Well, fortunately, no one's decided to kill you during your blackout, but your bathroom is in a bit of a mess. Oh, and did I mention there's a dead man beside you? How did they get there? Did you do that? You see they have been stabbed, the weapon being a very distinctive-looking dagger. So it's time for another question, and it's time to think fast. Do you call the police straight away? You've got option A of yes, or option B, no, as you wish to do some amateur sleuthing on your own account before getting the police involved.
Oh, I'm going to have to go for the amateur sleuthing, even though I know this might be a foolish decision. I'm going to have to go for the drama here. I want to be an amateur sleuth.
So you've gone for the amateur sleuthing option. This has a degree of risk, as delays in reporting a dead body can cause the police to view you with suspicion, which happens to James Bentley and Mrs. McGinty's dead. Before you proceed with your personal investigation, it might be worthwhile looking at some of the ways to avoid incriminating yourself further. After all, you do have a body in your bathroom. One of the easiest ways to end up at the top of a police officer's suspect list is to have a poor alibi. But if it's any comfort, there are many characters from Christie's universe who have been in a similar position to you. For example, in Mrs. McGinty's Dead, someone was foolish enough to walk unaccompanied during the evening, whilst others have indulged in the innocent occupation of spending time in the library early in the morning for some peace and quiet. Even this can be viewed with suspicion, as is the case in Dead Man's Mirror. Arguably, the most important thing to remember is to avoid lying to the police. In Spider's Web, a household finds they have a body on their hands, and rather than tell the police the truth, they try to pretend that they've been playing a game of cards when they were not. The problem with this phony alibi is that you can guarantee one card will go missing and expose your lie to the police. When it comes to travelling, keep the possessions in your pocket to a minimum, as this reduces the chances of people planting evidence at a crime scene to incriminate you. For this reason, it is probably a good time to quit smoking, as highly distinctive engraved cigarette cases have a horrible habit of cropping up near corpses. The same can be said for cigarette lighters, one of which is planted at a crime scene and taken at the flood. Murderers may also try to incriminate you by tricking you into being at the crime scene. The hoax letter is one such method, especially if the letter says to burn it after reading. Newspaper personals can also be used in the same way, and in one of Christie's prior mysteries, a woman, having followed up such a message, ends up drugged, only to awaken and find someone she knows dead beside her, and a bloodied knife in her hand. It is perhaps harder to be any more incriminated than that. Finally, one of the oddest examples of incrimination within the Christie universe is in a Miss Marple short story where a criminal takes a distinctive tyre from one vehicle belonging to someone else and puts it onto their own vehicle before committing their crime. The idea being that the police will think it was the other person driving at the time. However, keeping your car securely locked in your garage would thwart any such criminal plan. You take another look at the body and discover an address in their pocket. You decide this is something you should follow up. But a quick question before you dash off. Did you pick up that crossword and pen?
Yes, of course I did.
And due to your foresight, you were able to write a note addressed to your neighbour. They said they might be dropping off some plant cuttings. In your note, you say where you're going, and with sufficient hints that if you haven't returned after a given time, then your neighbour should summon help. On your way out, you must pass through your hallway. However, there is some safety advice to consider when using this space, as the hallway, incidentally, is as dangerous as a study, the death rate being identical in Christie's novels. This is despite it being a much more public space, yet death by gunshot, poison, strangulation and skewer all take place here. Given how accessible a space a hallway is, it is not a good idea to leave your drink in this room, nor pick up one which has been left for you. The nanny in Crooked House learnt this the hard way. If you ever host a weekend house party or have some friends over to stay, bear in mind that at night your hallway can become as busy as Piccadilly Circus, as no one ever seems to stay in their bedrooms during these occasions. Hallway alcoves can provide useful hiding places, which one character takes advantage of in the Seven Dials mystery, whilst the short story The Incredible Theft also shows the romantic possibilities of such a space at night. As Columbo might say, just one more thing, how are you going to travel to the address? Do you wish to take the underground, or do you want to walk to your destination?
Ooh, let's take the underground. That strikes me as the more unusual choice.
The biggest mistake that you can make when travelling by the underground is standing near to the edge of the platform. You might be angling for first pick of the spare seats, but you're also making it easier for any killer to bump you off in a way which looks like an accident. Such a scenario occurs in The Man in the Brown Suit. It is more likely to happen if there are many people on the platform, as large numbers do not guarantee many or any reliable witnesses. Crime writer Clifford Whitting, a contemporary of Christie, had a character remark in his mystery Midsummer Murder that the average Englishman had as keenly developed powers of observation as a congregation of turnips. You arrive outside the address, but before you go through the garden gate, you go inside the grocer's shop nearby to see if they have seen anything suspicious lately and to pick up any local gossip. To make the shopkeeper more amenable, you decide to buy an item, a ploy that both Poirot and Miss Marple used to great success. So do you buy some strawberries or a lettuce?
Ooh, let's say the lettuce.
Poirot would approve of your choice, as he too chose a lettuce in the ABC murders when he questioned the shopkeeper. The same cannot be said for Captain Hastings, who went for the other option of strawberries. Poirot sternly criticised this choice, pointing out the dangers of the strawberry juice creeping through their bag, endangering Hastings' suit. Other sensible fruit purchases include bananas, apples, and cabbages. Before you enter the house, you need to think about the best way to gain access. Fortunately, the Christie universe illustrates many different approaches. Why Didn't They Ask Evans demonstrates one of the more direct and dramatic methods, as it includes a staged car accident. This might appeal to the more theatrical among you, but bear in mind what it will do to your insurance premiums. Conversely, Nemesis offers a more genteel approach, as Miss Marple receives an invitation to stay at the household in question. This is only viable, though, if someone such as a client can prod the homeowners into issuing the invite. However, Miss Marple does not always wait for an invitation, as in A Pocket Full of Rye, her taxi is allowed past the policeman and through the gates because she looks so respectable that it is assumed she must be a relative of the family. But if you're not sure what to say once you've got as far as the front door, then you might want to take up the option Poirot deploys in Dumb Witness, which is to pretend that he is house hunting. Tuppence Beresford does something similar in By the Pricking of My Thumbs. Finally, if you're more interested in searching the property than in talking to its inhabitants, then you might want to assume the role of a tradesman. In The Pale Horse, various such roles are mentioned, including reading someone's gas or electric meter, electrician, and plumber. Did you buy the strawberries or the lettuce earlier, Kemper?
The lettuce.
Mulling over the plots used in Christie's novels, you decide to adapt a strategy used in The Pale Horse, and pretend to be someone conducting a home survey for customers' reactions satisfied, having jettisoned your letters beforehand. In this assumed role, you hope to be able to gain more information from the household to see if they have any connection to the body in your bathroom. Poirot himself said in the ABC Murders that there is nothing so dangerous for anyone who has something to hide as conversation, and the Christie universe offers several different conversational strategies for gaining information from suspects or witnesses, many of which involve lying or deception. Oh yes, even Miss Marple is not above the odd lie or two. In the pursuit of justice, of course. In a Caribbean mystery, she creates a fictitious nephew to find out if the victim still had an important photograph, whilst in Nemesis, she shocks the Home Secretary by lying to a post office worker about sending a parcel to the wrong place so she can get an address from them. And she also stages an accidental meeting with a witness outside of a supermarket. It is in this novel that Professor Wanstead says to her, "I see you're an actress, Miss Marple, as well as an avenger, so playing a role is a key skill in any amateur sleuthing you undertake." Miss Marple would also advise adopting a part which ties into your own appearance and the assumptions which attach to it. As an older woman, Miss Marple uses ageist and sexist stereotypes to her own advantage. She says in Nemesis that old maids were notoriously inquisitive. For her, this means she can get away with asking all manner of personal questions, because it is expected of someone in her demographic and would therefore seem perfectly natural. To be perceived as an ordinary, rather scatty old lady is very good camouflage in Miss Marple's opinion. It enables you to mislead and disarm your suspects, which Miss Marple corroborates in A Caribbean Mystery when she thinks to herself that old ladies were given to a good deal of rambling conversation. People were bored by this, but certainly did not suspect them of ulterior motives. While lying is used with good intentions by the amateur sleuth, the same cannot be said for the criminals you are trying to catch. And Miss Marple would urge you to be on your guard when questioning people. The weakness of being too credulous is a widespread problem in her eyes. As in The Body in the Library, she says, "Most people, and I don't exclude policemen, are far too trusting for this wicked world. They believe what is told them. I never do. I'm afraid I always like to prove a thing for myself." Eavesdropping is usually a frowned-upon activity, but unfortunately it can be an essential weapon in the sleuth's arsenal. In Evil Under the Sun, it is mentioned that Poirot does not scrupulously remove himself from the earshot of a private conversation, as he had no scruples of that kind, not when it was a question of murder. Moreover, at Bertram's Hotel includes Miss Marple's justification that if people do not choose to lower their voices, one must assume that they are prepared to be overheard. During your conversation, you have noticed how the occupants of the house seem on edge and distracted. They seem to be trying to give the impression that they are in the middle of some housework, but you suspect they were actually trying to get rid of evidence. Through a partially closed door, you notice something, a gap in a wall display, a gap which looks like it would fit an ornate dagger to complete a matching pair. The one left on the wall looks identical to the one in your bathroom. Based on what you have seen, do you decide to leave immediately so you can contact the police with what you already know? Or do you decide to extend your time in the house to look for further evidence?
I'm just going to double down and keep on investigating.
I like your gambling spirit.
Christie would approve. She liked people with courage.
Yes, you're doing Tuppence and Tommy proud, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Their adventurous spirit.
Well, once again, you turn to Christie's stories for inspiration and accidentally leave your gloves behind inside the house, so that when you're on the doorstep, you have a legitimate reason for not leaving immediately. The old glove ruse can be used in many ways, as in the Sitterford mystery, Emily left her gloves behind in the suspect's house so she could listen in on a private conversation after everyone thought she had left, as she had a perfect excuse for still being in the house if she got caught. You are invited for refreshments. Perhaps they have noticed the poor impression they are giving you and want to instead look like people who have no worries. Hoping for more information, you accept. A variety of beverages are offered. Do you accept the tea, the milk, the sherry, or none of the above?
None of the above.
Good choice.
Certainly not the milk.
And another question, did you write that note earlier?
Yes.
Your refusal to have anything to drink raises the suspicions of the household, but your foresight in leaving a note for your neighbour means that before you come to any harm, your neighbour arrives with the police. You're all too ready to hand this case over to them and tell them your story. Despite some damning personal choices, the police decide to be lenient with you and let you go, satisfied at least that they can arrest the real suspects. As you leave, a policeman, with a chastising note in his voice, says to you, "You are that favourite character of fiction, the amateur detective." I don't know they really hold their own with a professional in real life. Given your shortcomings in this case, you say nothing and start off home. But your neighbour catches up with you and suggests having a drink together in their library instead. You agree, thinking it would be good to wind down after a rather stressful time. It's actually harder to come across a body in the library than you might expect. Christie described this trope as one of the cliches of the detective story. Over the course of her career, only 5 people are killed in this room in her mystery novels, although she does have some further library victims in her short stories and plays. It is advisable to avoid having a library of French windows, as these make it a lot easier for someone to enter your library without anyone else in your household realising, until it is too late. This is one of the mistakes Henry Reedburn makes in the short story The King of Clubs. One contentious point, which arises from book ownership, concerns how you should organise them. Should it be by genre or by author alphabetically? Should it be by colour or mood? We all have our own ideas on the subject, and this includes Poirot, who in The Adventure of the Western Star says that the tallest books go in the top shelf, the next tallest in the row beneath, and so on. Thus we have order, method. Personally, I think this sounds like anarchy. Regardless of which genre we love the most, any true bookaholic or bookworm has the ultimate lifelong goal of having their own library, for at least one set of sliding ladders on the bookcases. But unfortunately, in the Christie universe, for a small percentage of the population, a library can have a lifespan shortening effect. Are you one such person? How can you tell? Here is a quiz based on Christie's stories to help you find out. You can keep score on your fingers. Number 1, like Adele Fortescue in A Pocket Full of Rye, are you soon going to come into a lot of money? 2, are you suffering with strained relations within your marriage like Lord Edgware in the eponymous mystery Lord Edgware Dies? Or number 3, are you more like Joyce Reynolds in Halloween Party, prone to exaggeration and telling untruths to look impressive in the eyes of others? 4, perhaps instead you're in possession of a guilty secret. That too can lead to death in the library, such as in Endless Night and The Secret of Chimneys. 5, do you dislike having to use your home as a place for entertainment? As The Voice in the Dark, Harley Quinn short story shows, if you possess a library, then you're required to host social activities such as seances, whether you like them or not, if they are desired by your guests. Number 6, are you fond of ostentatious building materials such as marble? It might look nice, especially when it is used to make a fireplace, but as depicted in The King of Clubs, it can have deadly consequences if you're punched, This returns us back to the issue of how unpopular or unlikable you might be with those you know. Number 7, do you find bronze statues appealing decorations for a library? They might give a touch of class or a sense of grandeur, but Sir James Dwighton in The Love Detectives probably wishes he didn't own any, as one is used to bash his head in. Finally, number 8, do you love secret passageways? Christie's play Spiderweb demonstrates their ambiguous role, as on the one hand they do provide a quick place to hide a body, but in turn they can be used by a killer as a hiding spot as they wait to leap out and strike you. If you answered yes to 5 or more of these questions, then I'm afraid that having a library of your own poses a serious health risk for you, as well as for your friends. Murders at public libraries are comparatively rarer, so they are the best place for you to get your next read. If you answered mostly no to the above questions, then congratulations, you are safe to have a library of your own. Whether you can afford one is a separate issue. Perhaps you know someone who mostly answered yes to those questions. Can you wiggle your way into their will? You're having an enjoyable time chatting to your neighbour, who seems to have great taste in books, based on the titles you've spotted on their bookcases. You begin to wonder if something might develop between you and your rather good-looking neighbour. After all, more than one of Christie's mysteries shows how a murder can bring 2 people together, such as Towards Zero. Even Poirot said in the ABC Murders, "Murder is a great matchmaker." But how do you get their attention? You're not the first person to ponder such a question in the Christie universe, as Celia Austen, Hickory Dickory Dock, has her heart set on one of the other lodgers at the boarding house she lives in. If only she'd been able to reach out to an expert in the field, a sympathetic ear, an agony aunt, in fact, by the name of Agatha. What advice might she have given? Perhaps it would have gone something like this. Dear Celia, you're not the first young woman to be frustrated in her attempts to gain the attention of the man she loves. It's not enough to laugh at their awful jokes or try a new shade of lipstick in order to get noticed. After all, Miss Marple, a very good friend of mine, once said men are quite unable to see what's going on under their eyes. It would be understandable if you were thinking you might need to attempt desperate measures to get your man. Even Poirot himself said a girl is entitled to do so. But beware. Remember that romance can be quite risky to venture into. You might think an investigation into a series of thefts or even a murder is the prime time for finding the one. But nothing is assured in this life. Your plan might work, or it might very easily not, and you could be in danger of being bumped off or being used as a camouflage by a killer. They often say that faint heart never won fair lady, yet I would still urge caution when contemplating bolder wooing strategies. For example, the thriller School of Thought, spearheaded by Anne Bedingfeld, would recommend placing yourself in a jeopardous near-death experience involving a cliff or ravine, thus providing your romantic interest with the opportunity to rescue you in a self-esteem bolstering manner. In such a situation, wearing your most attractive nightwear is also advised, and if it is lightly coloured, then you'll be easier to find if your rescue occurs at night. However, this is not a suggestion I can readily endorse, not least because it entails nearly getting killed. That aside, this is not a comfortable option if it occurs during the winter, or if you're not good with heights, and one problem not really covered in contemporary literature and its artwork is that nighties and nettles are not a great combination. And you know it is sod's law, there will be some nettles. You would have to hope your hero has brought some calamine lotion, as nighties as a rule don't tend to have pockets. That said, if you do adopt this approach and do fall foul of nettles, then try to take some comfort from these words Christie wrote in her autobiography. It is a curious thought, but it is only when you see people looking ridiculous that you realise just how much you love them. Before embarking on any courtship plans, it is important to ascertain if the person is interested in and amenable to spending time with you. Furthermore, it is prudent to avoid coming on too strong until you are confident of the other person's feelings. For example, Christie received a fan letter from West Africa in which the writer declares, "I'm filled with enthusiasm for you and want you to be my mother. I'm arriving in England next month." One is not surprised that Christie wrote back saying she was going abroad indefinitely. Whilst this example does not involve romantic love, the lessons to be learned from it certainly apply to this arena. However, on some occasions, romantic signals can be less clear. For example, Christie recalls a time when her relative, whom she called Auntie Granny, expressed admiration about a man courting Madge, Christie's sister. The reason for this positivity was that Granny had seen a suitor called Ambrose pocketing some gravel from the path Madge had just walked on. She perceived this as true devotion. Alas, Christie writes, "Poor darling Granny, we had to disillusion her. Ambrose, it turned out, was deeply interested in geology, and the gravel had been of a particular type which interested him." Moreover, in the hollow, when Edward and Henrietta are going for a walk, he perceives her enjoyment of this company as a sign of affection, yet the reader is privy to her thoughts, in which she states, "I believe it's his bones I like so much." Her subsequent refusal to his marriage proposal is therefore not that unexpected. But don't lose heart. Love can blossom in the most surprising of places, even between two people whose manner and attitudes contrast. Opposites can sometimes attract. Captain Hastings, despite his blunders, found this to be very much true with his wife, a woman he first met on a train, and during this encounter, the sparks flew the most when they disagreed or disapproved of one another. Who knew that disapproving of someone swearing could lead to wedding bells? Be warned, though, that too much disagreement in which one party does not relish the cut and thrust of a debate that criticizes their own view may not lead to a happily ever after. Mr. Ferguson encountered this difficulty in Death on the Nile and was baffled when the woman he proposed to turned him down for another man. Hope this helps, Aunt Agatha. Deciding to take the initiative, which of the following options do you take? Option 1, try to get their attention by giving the appearance of being a kleptomaniac, since you notice some psychology books in their library. You begin removing objects from their home and from your neighbours when you visit them. Option 2, try to impress them by flashing your cash and buying yourself things which you can take around and show them. Or option 3, start a private detective agency together.
Oh, let's start a private detective agency together.
You have chosen wisely, and I would not have expected less from you, Kemper. And you've gone with the best choice, as having a common goal or mutual passion can help to unite two people and sustain their relationship, which is borne out in Christie's marriage to Max, with her biographer Laura Thompson saying that archaeology became a way of sharing her husband's life. Tommy and Tuppence Beresford would also approve of your decision. When life became a bit too dull for Tuppence in the short story A Fairy in the Flat, Tommy quips that he could make her jealous by taking other women out to nightclubs. To this she replies, "Useless. You would only meet me there with other men. And I should know perfectly well that you didn't care for the other women, whereas you would never be quite sure that I didn't care for the other men." Fortunately, instead, they took up an offer to run their own detective agency, and their relationship thrived as they tackled each new case. Yours will surely flourish together, and whilst looking for an office to rent and deciding on your business name, don't forget to buy a copy of How to Survive a Classic Crime Novel, some highly recommended reading for anyone planning on a sleuthing career.
Lovely. That was quite a journey that you took us on, Kate. I don't think I've ever experienced anything exactly like that.
That's a good thing or a bad thing.
No, it's a good thing. I know. I think because you really get in the weeds of these novels, but you do so in such a diverting and sort of jocular way that I've just never really seen anyone do it quite like that. And I think that's the draw here of this book for mystery fans. And it was such a delight to see you do that with Christie specifically, just for this episode too. I so appreciate you doing this and tailoring the journey to Christie. But I think that does give a really good sense of what you're doing in your book. And I was just bubbling over with all of the references. It was honestly, at one point I literally had to mute myself because I was like, starting to say like all the different titles that you were referencing, and I wanted to like butt in with knowledge just so I could show off my knowledge of Christie, but that's not what we were here for. We were here to hear from you, so that's why I muted myself. But that was just so much fun. I mean, you packed in dozens, if not hundreds, of references to Christie novels and short stories, and I never thought about the bathroom and the hallway in particular. I never even thought of the hallway as a domestic space, but absolutely, being a deadly sort of zone in Christie novels. But that's such a good point. Really, really interesting and really, really fun. Thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yes, I hadn't really thought about the hallway or the bathroom much either, but until a few years ago, I did a post about which room is Agatha Christie most likely to kill you in? And that's when I had to diligently go through all the books, trying to figure out where people died and was it a delayed death? So it got quite complicated. And I had to ask various bloggers for advice, and even Mark Aldridge, some very nitpicky questions to figure out all those answers.
What was the most deadly room, may I ask?
It was the bedroom, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just for the novels, just under 50% all take place in the bedroom.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's sort of a wide umbrella of incidents that can take place in the bedroom for various reasons and in various ways. But that's interesting. And I also love your point about the library, because it's true that we, of course, have the body in the library, but she really did think of that as such a cliched thing. It's part of the joke of that book and the establishing hook of that book. She's acknowledging the fact, I think, that it's cliched there. She certainly doesn't overuse the library death. And when she does, even in Spider's Web, also, it's quite self-conscious, the secret passageway and all of that. So, this is, I think what you're doing with this exercise is very much what I and what Catherine and I tried to always do on this podcast, which is to be granular, but have fun at the same time, to nitpick and just sort of sift through everything, use a fine-toothed comb, whatever analogy you want to use, but to do so in a way that's meant to divert and sort of just be enjoyable for mystery fans. So yeah, I just think that a lot of listeners out there will appreciate the work that you've done in your book. I obviously recommend it and encourage people to go and check it out for themselves.
Oh, thank you very much. And yes, I found when I was going through the books again, it was often throwaway comments or anecdotes of where you found the most amusing things, such as Miss Marple remembering a friend of hers who slipped on their bathroom flooring because the maid was too zealous in polishing it, and then being mortified because the gardener had to come through the window.
It's Christie's dialogue sparkles like no other, and she actually packs so much into her dialogue. She does a lot of her character work in dialogue, which is so efficient and elegant as a writer. But she also does reference a lot of amusing incidents, and she also obviously packs her clues in to her dialogue as well. There's just a lot going on in those little asides and the back and forth between characters. And I think there's a lot to be mined in that dialogue if we pay close attention to it. So that doesn't surprise me that you were able to use the dialogue for your purposes while you were researching the book. I can't let you go, Kate, without asking you the question that I ask almost everyone on this podcast. I'm going to force you to choose. If you had to choose between Monsieur Poirot and Miss Jane Marple, who would you choose and why?
Oh, this is a much easier question in comparison to my favourite Christie novel. The answer immediately is it's all the way Team Miss Marple, I think. I don't know if I think Poirot maybe gets some of the more puzzling cases to do, maybe some of the more dramatic solutions. But in terms of who would actually most like to sit down, have a cup of tea with and a piece of cake, I think it would be Miss Marple. Because you'd probably be, try to be quite unassuming, asking some polite questions, and then you just wait for that incisive moment where she says something that completely undoes you. And I think that would be quite fun.
Well, I think given our conversation even earlier in this episode, when you were talking about what you are often looking for in your mysteries and the ways that you engage with them, it's not surprising to me that the Miss Marple novels and short stories might be the ones that you connect with more. I think for people who primarily are reading Christie for the puzzle, and there is nothing wrong with that, because Christie is one of the best, if not the best puzzle maker in the world ever, that those people might tend to prefer Poirot just because he is featured in so many of her very best of the puzzles. But if you are looking for the puzzles, but perhaps a bit more, and it's the character, it's the psychological insight, it's the humor, all of those non-puzzly elements, I think you could still choose Poirot, actually, because those books have so much going on. But there is a lot more of that, I think, in the Miss Marples, which is also why I will always choose Miss Marple, but everyone already knew that, so I won't go on about it. Well, I am so thrilled that you chose Miss Marple, and I'm also so thrilled that you came on the podcast, and I will be including a link in the notes to this episode for anyone who would like to click on it and check out Kate's book, How to Survive a Classic Crime Novel. So again, I very much encourage you all to check that out. And I just want to thank you once again for being on the podcast, Kate.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much to Kate Jackson. I have provided a link both to her blog and to her book in the notes to this episode. I encourage you all to check out both. For next week's episode, and that's right, that is next week's episode, which will be dropping on the 22nd of December or thereabouts, I am going to be covering some new material and revisiting some material that we've already covered on this podcast. Some of you may remember that over the summer, I reviewed the short story Star Over Bethlehem by Agatha Christie Mallowan. That is the titular story in her short story and poem collection, Star Over Bethlehem and Other Stories. This is an unusual little volume of short stories and poetry that Agatha Christie put out late in her career. And I was fortunate enough to have an excellent co-host for that episode, the pastor, Sarah Hinlicky Wilson. I am going to be covering another of the short stories from the Star Over Bethlehem collection next week. That story is The Naughty Donkey. You heard me right, The Naughty Donkey by Agatha Christie Mallowan. So I will be discussing that, and then I'm going to be rerunning the Star Over Bethlehem episode directly afterward, because it's such a great story to think about and perhaps to reread at Christmas time. So that will be next week's episode. Until then, you can always check out the podcast's Patreon page. For December's Patreon, I covered 3 Christmas-themed short murder mysteries by Marjorie Allingham, as well as a Colin Dexter Inspector Morse mystery. It's all Christmas all the time over here in the All About Agatha podcast world. So head on over to Patreon if you'd like to check that out, www.patreon.com/allaboutagatha, or click on the link I've provided in the notes to this episode. You can email me at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. You can find the podcast on Twitter at allaboutthedame and on Instagram at allaboutagatha. You can find me on Facebook at Kemper Donovan Books, and you can click on the various links I have provided to pre-order my upcoming mystery novel, The Busybody, in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia and New Zealand. Thank you again for rating and reviewing the podcast, and please keep those ratings and reviews coming, and I'll see you next time. Bye.